Welcome to the Mailtime Podcast. I'm Daniel Mail. I'm joined today by Rabbi Mark Wilds. He is the founder of the Manhattan Jewish Experience, MJE. For those who are not familiar with the ins and outs of MJE, Rabbi, I'm going to ask
Impossible.
you.
It's impossible.
Impossible. So for those, perhaps those who have not made their way through Manhattan at some point,
Right, living under a rock somewhere. Yeah.
living under exactly. So you also came out with a book, The Jewish Experience, last September. But before we get to the book, what have you been doing with MJE? What's the mission, and what do you guys do?
Okay, first of all, thanks for inviting me. It's an honor, a pleasure, big fan. So I started MJ 27 years ago to engage our less affiliated Jewish brothers and sisters. I felt that there was a whole segment of Jews out there that are just, kind of going to synagogue a couple times a year, having a Passover Seder, but just not really being engaged in Jewish life. So I tried my hand at it. It was an experiment for the first year or two, and then it just took off. We have 3 sites in the city. We engage about 6,000 people a year. We have about 20,000 attendees at different events and programs. We just opened up in Tel Aviv, and we're really just trying to light a fire of Jewish excitement under young people's bellies, in their bellies, if you will. And I hate to say it, but October 7th gave us a big boost. More people have been coming. It dipped a little, I would say 6 months later, but it's pretty much sustained itself. COVID set us back. October 7th, believe it or not, ironically moved us forward. And it's just great. I love it. And the book is really my attempt to package a lot of the wisdom that I've been trying to share for these last 27 years with my students. Corin, who's the publisher, approached me. Um, can you hear that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, listen, but while I let the siren go, I'll just say the
Yeah.
proof is in the pudding. Basically, anywhere I go or went when I was living in Manhattan before we migrated down south, and someone would say, "Oh, you live on the Upper West Side? Do you know Rabbi Wilds? Do you know MJE? I had an amazing time. Certainly in the Baal Tshuva movement. I learned how to daven with Rabbi Wilds, and that's the proof in the pudding. You really can't. Those are the results you're looking for.
Thank you.
Back
I
to you, Rabbi.
appreciate that. No, I'm glad to hear word got around.
And it's not even just the word; it's people that were inspired by your organization and then decided to become more engaged in Judaism on a daily basis.
Yeah, I'll tell you, before I get back into the book, just on that, I had to go to a funeral yesterday, unfortunately. One of my students lost his dad, and he's been out of MJ 15 years. But he, at the funeral, acknowledged my presence, MGE, what it did for him to bring him out, and really gave great honor to his father's memory. And he wasn't raised with such a strong Jewish background, but he knew how proud his father was that he took a step forward in his Judaism. And yeah, we're a lot of nachas. We have hundreds and hundreds of alumni living Jewish lives. I'm going to their children's bar bat mitzvot now, you know. And the book is really my attempt to put onto paper a lot of the wisdom that gets thrown around here, but may get lost if you're not actually in the classroom. And I'd like to, after 120, leave this world, with some of this wisdom behind that has been successful in igniting a spark in a lot of young Jewish people.
You mentioned October 7th having a big impact, and I'm looking at the different ways in which you broke down Judaism and the engagement with Jewish tradition, and it was essentially God, Torah, prayer, Shabbat, kindness, and Tikkun Olam. I don't see Israel there. So how do you what's your approach and understanding and philosophy when it comes to the modern political state of Israel and one's Judaism, and how did you bridge, if there is a gap, how did you bridge that gap after October 7th?
It's not in there because I haven't written volume 2. And my next volume is going to include a whole section on Israel. And this is meant to be the first of a 3-part series. We didn't make that so clear because I didn't want to obligate myself to write 2 more books.
It's a lot of pressure if everyone knows there's 2 more books coming.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure, and but this is only the first basic 6 topics. I have another 12 that I would like to write up, one of which is Israel. Israel is incredibly important to me personally, and of course to Torah, Judaism, and the Jewish people. You can't really describe yourself or Judaism without talking about the centrality of the land of Israel, and I think in modern times the state of Israel. I'm a big, I call, I guess what you would refer to as a religious Zionist, and whether that's a Rav Soloveitchik, Yad Hashem, the hand of God, or it's Rav Kook, Atzchalta de Geula, the beginning of the redemption. However, whatever your take, but I don't simply view, I don't view the state of Israel, albeit a secular one, as just any other country in the world. I see it as either the beginning of the unfolding of the Messianic redemption, and I know that the founders did not have that in mind. Um, or I see it really as an expression of God's hand in human history. That was Rav Soloveitchik's view. And I teach that a lot. I incorporate that a lot into my classes. I have two boys living in Israel, both made Aliyah. My youngest is serving in the army now. I'm very proud. And kind of living vicariously through him. And we just opened up in Tel Aviv, where I think there's tremendous opportunities right now.
So after October 7th, people are running to MJE and they're trying to understand, okay, what do we do? There's hostages. There's so many people that were murdered. It seems like total chaos. How did you apply the lessons of this first volume here to the audience that came
Yeah.
to MJE?
So that's a great question. Basically, we need to know what it is we're defending. What October 7th exposed was a certain nerve that, well, not a nerve, but it might even be an embarrassing point in who we are. If I address a group of 30 students at MGE and I go around, the average level of education in the room, secular education, is at least a master's degree. If not a law degree, a doctorate in something, medical, but we are so ill educated, poorly educated in our Judaism. There are more Jews that speak French in the United States than do Hebrew, but that could read French, then can read Hebrew. So, when Jews are coming out of the woodwork, as they thankfully are today because of what's happened, anti-Semitism, they're coming and they want to talk about why are we hated. And you know what? I don't want to have that conversation because there's no real good reason in my mind. I think like any form of bigotry, it's irrational. I think at the end of the day, what anti-Semitism should push us to do is understand, why is Judaism worth preserving? Why stand up for it? Why not simply take the yarmulke off, take the chai necklace off, and assimilate and be like everyone else, and they won't bother you? Now, they may find out ethnically you're still Jewish, but you can do a good job in the modern era to hide that and go underground. The only reason we are not disappearing is presumably there's something about Judaism that's worth preserving. So what is that? And that's why I wrote the book. It's just the first 6 reasons to stay Jewish. And there are a lot more, obviously, but I'm hoping people are going to see the wisdom and they're going to see why fighting anti-Semitism is worth it, not simply to survive, but to live as a Jew.
And I was actually struck by your discussion on prayer and it basically not being all or nothing. Can you elaborate a bit on that and how you try to explain a siddur that is at least 50% in Hebrew, right? If someone's
Right.
picking up a normal siddur, if it has English translations or another language, how do you explain that to someone who has just learned that they have a Jewish background, but they really don't understand much of what they're saying in Hebrew, or they're not even able to read Hebrew?
Yeah, so I mean, the simple answer is read the English. There's nothing wrong with that. You can pray in any language. And I do encourage my students to pray in English. I do at the same time feel that you're losing something, or we're losing something, if we stick to that permanently. We only pray in English because there's something, as you know, Kabbalistically significant about the Hebrew letters of the alphabet. Through those letters, these are vessels. And I say this in the book, that most language is there to articulate pre-existing ideas. Hebrew, we believe, is qualitatively different. Hebrew creates the ideas. It's through the letters that serve as spiritual vessels for certain realities to come alive in the physical world. So when you're praying in Hebrew, it has almost like a magical, mystical impact on the higher, heavenly spheres and on your soul. But that's not enough for most rational thinking people. If I just tell you, say abracadabra, and by the way, that's in the book. I don't know if you saw that, because the words abracadabra are from adabracadabra, which is mean I will say something and it will be. It's through speech that we create certain realities. That's how why we believe God created the world through speech. So praying in Hebrew is very, very important because no matter how much you understand and intellectualize the whole experience, there's something about the Hebrew that connects us in a way that no language can, no other language can. Having said that, we're also supposed to feel something emotionally. The Talmud calls prayer avodah shebelev, service of the heart. How are you going to feel something emotionally if you don't understand what you're saying? So I think everyone has to find their balance between the language they understand and then the Hebrew language that has this holiness to it.
And how do you r- try to encourage people to learn Hebrew, also try to understand what the prayers are,
Yeah,
try to understand that they have even enough time to learn about uh, day-to-day things when it comes to Judaism? It's a lot to handle because
yeah,
even if you're sitting there focused on, okay, how do I read Shemona Esrei in Hebrew, then you don't really have the mind space to be able to then actually think about the words. So how do you manage to deal with that when people have such limited time? And if you're living on the Upper West Side or somewhere in Manhattan, chances are you have a pretty intense job.
yeah. Yeah, so it's kind of what you touched on before. You don't, the Talmud says tafasta meruba lo tafasta. You try to grab onto too much, you end up with nothing. If you spend just a few minutes before you get to synagogue or your own personal prayer, and you read a little from the book in the chapter of prayer, I don't just talk about prayer in a vacuum. I speak about the specifics, what this prayer, who wrote it, what was it intended to communicate, what we should try to feel when we say this prayer. If you can do a little prep, you know, then the experience of praying is going to be so much more. But it doesn't have to be hours and hours and hours. It could just be literally reading a few pages of wisdom about a certain prayer. And I'll say something else about tefillah. It's really supposed to be, as you know, an experiential kind of thing. It's not an intellectual exercise. And the Hebrew word lehitzpalel, which means to judge. It's to judge oneself. It's the reflexive form of the word. Pilel is to judge, because when you pick up the prayer book contains all of these beliefs and ideas of Judaism. And if you say a certain belief, like I believe in a one God, there's a certain unity to all humanity, to the world. It all begins with God. You're not supposed to just say it. You're supposed to reflect on it and use the prayer book almost like a mirror and to ask myself, okay, I'm saying I believe in this thing, but am I living accordingly? And then you're using the prayers to really self evaluate. And that's how you grow. Prayer ultimately is designed to enable us to grow and to become different people than we were. Now, I realize some people don't have the best experience in their synagogue and all that, but that's ideally what it's designed to do, to change us.
And I apologize if I'm harping too much on MJA here. I just in my I'm a not uh one man band here, going about things as I see them interesting and what I think the audience appreciates that I pursue things that I think are interesting. How has the person that's shown up trying to learn these lessons changed from, say, 25 years ago until today? Obviously, very different generations.
Yeah.
The introduction of the iPhone and different attention spans, social media. How do you find that the average person who walks in is different today than it was 25 years ago?
Wow. Um, they're not searching as much for objective truth as they used to when I first started out in this business. People were looking for like what is right and wrong, and let's see if Judaism has. Unfortunately, too many of our young people are coming off campus where objective morality has been challenged, or and it's just been dispensed with on some level. People
Wait
are
a
look,
sec. I would actually say that it's before campus because now it's actually creeped into the elementary and middle school education. Because if you're teaching things that are everything subjective, then you're actually priming the pump
yeah,
for
yeah,
people to go to campus.
yeah. It doesn't. It started on college campus, but it's found its way into elementary and middle school, high school. It's really difficult. It makes it, I think it's much harder to bring a Jew back today than it was 25 years ago. On the other hand, the vocabulary and ideology of Kabbalah and mysticism is more resonant today than it ever was before. So I started teaching Tanya, and I started getting into all this. My oldest son is very into Kabbalah and Chassidut, and he kind
You're
of
not a Chabad house, though.
I'm not a Chabad house. I don't have the same. I just can't wear the beard like you do. It's pretty solid.
Thank you, thank you. Look,
Um,
different strokes for different folks on it. There's reasons why, but I definitely appreciate people that I think it's fascinating that yeshiva, university, modern Orthodox, Rav Soloveitchik institutions also teaching Tanya. I think it's great.
yeah, I mean, they're not so much. They're not up there
I'm
yet.
saying through what you're doing, and
Yeah.
I'm not. Yeah, yeah.
But all my kids went to the classic YU gap year programs, Shalavim, all that. And you see books when you go, when I visit my kids learning in yeshiva, you'd see the Tanya and you'd see, the Ramchal was kind of like the bridge for a lot of people into that world, the Maharal. And the brilliance of the Rebbe and Tanya and I don't know if you know Chaim Miller who wrote the
Of course, yeah.
translation.
Hmm.
Yeah, so he's a friend and I'm very taken by this, and I teach literally in the office where I am right now. I have a like a chabura every week where we go through Kabbalah and Chassidut. So this generation is a little more open to that. And I present in the first two chapters of the book rational arguments for the existence of God and the divinity of the Torah. I think those things are still important because even if you get sucked into Judaism through Kabbalah and Chassidut, you do when your mind starts bothering you with those questions, those annoying questions, how do I really know? I think it's important to be equipped with those approaches and answers too, that we have rational explanations for why. And I'm not saying I can prove it. I'm not saying I can prove it 85%, 95, but at least 51%. I think the belief in God and that he authored the Torah makes more sense than the alternative. And that's the way I think most people make decisions in life based on what makes more sense than the alternative. So I put that in the book too, and I think that's important. But this generation is resonating with two things that the previous one didn't. One is Kabbalah and Chassidut, and the second one is Shabbat. Now, Shabbat was always the number one bestseller, if you will, in the Kiruv outreach world, right? Rabbi Riskin, my teacher, Shalom be well, used to say, "For the price of a chicken, you can save a Jew," and it's true. But there's another aspect of Shabbat today that is such an easy sell like we've never had before, and that's technology detox. People are so wired up that the prospect of turning the phone off and having some sort of ritual that demands they close down their tech shop for 24 hours is such a huge relief. And you mentioned young people before, not just for adults, teenagers. I'll just tell you a quick story. When my daughter was, she's 21 now, but when she was like 15, 16, glued to the phone like all of her friends, she had four friends over for Shabbat. They were in high school. We ran around the table like we do it. We had a lot of MGEers there. And I said, I asked everyone, what do you most love about Shabbos? And when I got to one of my daughter's friends, she said that I can't use the phone. I said, what? Uh, uh, What do you mean that's the best part? I thought you dread that. And the second Shabbos is out, She was like, no, it's such a relief. And all the girls, including my daughter, agreed that it is so. I would say that's another big difference that Shabbos is a much easier sell. And not just the positive aspects of making Kiddush and this and that, but literally shutting down, observing the Lamitet Melachot, the 39 acts of work, and just, pulling back.
How do you balance? I want to say kind of the universal values of that tech uh, pause versus the very specific commandment towards the Jewish people. My late friend Charlie Kirk just posthumously came out with a book about Shabbat. I know it's a little bit strange for the Jewish community to learn about Shabbat from a non-Jewish person and be encouraged in that way. How do you balance? And I'm not speaking ill, God forbid, of Charlie or what he's trying to promote in terms of a better society, but how do you balance that uh, challenge?
Well, I mean, you think about anything in life you take for granted, and Judaism is the first thing we all take for granted, whether we were raised with it or not. And then when you have someone who's that influential, who's that impactful on society, whether you agreed with everything he said or not, I don't think it matters. He was a force of nature, Charlie Kirk. For a person like that who's not Jewish, who has no commandment to observe the Sabbath, and he did speak about how some aspects of Christian scholarship do demand the observance of Shabbat, but not on Saturdays. And he began to rest Friday, Sunday to Saturday sundown. And you take it more seriously. You just do. It's the same reason why I bring in lawyers and doctors and people successful in business to talk about their Judaism rather than bringing in another rabbi. Because I don't know, it's just like a easier sell to someone who's a young professional to hear about some attorney that's finding, value in keeping halacha in general or Shabbat in particular. So then you got a guy like Charlie Kirk who's not Jewish, who's telling the world what amazing, you know, how he has so much more quality time with his family now because he doesn't keep, because he's. And I want you to know, Shai Davidai, who's I consider a friend, comes to MJE. He puts his phone down now on Shabbat. And you know why? Not because of Mark Wilds, even though I got a whole chapter in the book on Shabbat, the Jewish experience. And he read the book and he interviewed me for over an hour. What got him to put the phone down was Charlie Kirk, because he saw him as not having to do it, someone from outside of our world. If he's seeing value in it, maybe I should look into it.
I'll just add a Charlie Kirk story. When we were running around about 11 years ago, I was in college. He had dropped out, of course, because he was building Turning Point USA. And he loved pickles. So he would always insist on only going to kosher deli or really kosher delis so you can get pickles. So we love Mr. Broadway. That was a frequent stop. And I'll just say that he was the whole kosher thing inconveniencing him. Oh, is this going to be out of his way? Is this going to be uh, perhaps less tasty? Are you going to try to fudge it and you get kosher and I get not kosher and we meet somewhere in the middle at a Starbucks outside? No, he was completely all in kosher. He said, in fact, I have a text message from him saying dinner's on tonight, but only if there's good pickles. So again, it was very,
How
very
did you how did
understanding.
how did you become close with him in school?
I had transferred to Brandeis, and I gotten myself into some political disagreements. Really, it actually came down to respect. I was upset.
You getting into a political disagreement with someone?
It's
I
complete shock, right?
Hard to imagine.
So exactly. So but I'll just say for the record, there was a former IDF spokesperson who was speaking, and this agitating group of uh, hard left Jewish activists came in and were kind of trying to egg him on. And I actually wrote a story saying that even if you disagree with him, I didn't like how they went about that.
Right.
I'm not a favor of the ambush interviews in the middle of someone trying to give a speech. And that eventually caught the eye of Ben Shapiro. And I started working for Ben Shapiro for just under 2 years.
Mhm.
And he had this retreat. And we went to this retreat. I think it was in California. The collection of people that were there is really incredible. And then Charlie walks in or he was actually sitting at a table. I walk in, he goes, "Oh, you work for Ben Shapiro? Okay, I know I can trust you." So we became best of friends
Wow.
for about 2 years. I helped him write I think, a few speeches for the Jewish community because again, he was used to getting up there and saying, uh, "Big government sucks." Against Obama, against Hillary Clinton. That was his stump speech.
Mhm.
Against high taxes, and he had no idea how to speak to a bipartisan Jewish coalition and wanted to do so. So I helped him kind of with the language there. And I'll never forget, actually, after the first speech I helped him with, he got off stage and Chaim Saban,
Mhm.
who is a very, very prominent Democrat donor, friend of Hillary Clinton, uh, rocks over and says, "I'd like to contribute and get involved in what you're doing." And I was just dying inside
Wow. Wow.
because it was very funny that now Charlie is now speaking to Chaim Saban. But it was, I saw a side of him that was also before Trump, because once Trump became the nominee, uh, I was less interested in the political space at that time. And Charlie started then working for Donald Trump Jr. And that became a whole nother level of fandom and fame. And private jets around the country with
Mhm.
Don Jr. and others. And I knew the Charlie that I knew was meeting me at Mr. Broadway to strategize on how to pitch Fox News guests, hosts. Like, it was a big deal. I'd gotten onto Megyn Kelly, and he'd never gotten onto Megyn Kelly. He was only on like Charles Payne, the 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. on Fox Business, right? He'd gotten a lot of hits, but he was on the smaller shows, and I had managed to get onto Megyn Kelly. So we're sitting there exchanging emails about different producers, and I got to see that side of Charlie when he was flying economy, staying at 2-star hotels, and hustling. He was hustling. He worked really hard,
Wow.
and was trying to do what he could to save the country. He was trying to
Wow.
basically uh, take the tactics of the Obama organizers and apply them to the conservative movement. I'd say upon his assassination, you could say he did a tremendously good job at doing that. Um, but that was his goal.
He was just such a great defender of Israel. I mean, and
I think the best thing about him though was that he was a great defender of all of the principles that I personally feel many of the principles I believe are very important, and it was embedded in, if you're a conservative and if you believe in free markets, if you believe in women's rights, if you believe in that there is a relationship between Jewish values and if you're going to couch it as Judeo-Christian values,
mm,
uh, that there's something worth preserving, right? I think it's very, very powerful when you come from that perspective, as opposed to just saying like, "Oh yeah, yeah, I left yeshiva, and this is why you must support Jewish people," right? So I think I think that it's a very, very strong
wow.
and principled defense. And I actually have a message from him. I think it was in the 2014. It was 2014 in the war. He sent me a picture of the TV in his hotel room saying, Jews and Christians must always stand together.
Wow.
And yeah, and one more I'll tell you. When Ezra Schwartz, Hashem Yikom Tamo, was murdered in Judea and Samaria, I believe that was 2015.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
he was
yeah.
completely heartbroken.
It really affected him.
It really affected him. And when so I went to Camp Yavna in New Hampshire,
Mm,
and they have this program where kind of the CIT level people watch some of the youngest kids for, I don't want to say 2 hours, maybe Motzi Shabbos, also a little bit. So one of the kids that I had watched was Ezra Schwartz for one summer, and um, it obviously struck me, even though I hadn't seen him in 8 years or whatever, however long it had been. But um, I had told Charlie, and Charlie was really, really emotional. I really, really bothered him, and I have the emails from him going back and forth about it. It really bothered him, and this is all stuff that is well before he's big and famous and everyone knows everything
wow.
about him. This is not making a statement for a camera. This is not going and trying to perform. This is genuine. Charlie, yeah, he was a
Wow.
great guy. Um, and again, there's things I disagreed with him on, things I agreed with him
Right.
on. He's a great guy.
But just getting back to how we started this, the Shabbos thing, I think it's a beautiful way of remembering him, of elevating his soul, and it's something that Jews need. Shabbat it's the way in. It's the way into Judaism.
Absolutely. Now, for again, I'm trying to couch some of the. I'm interested in the topics of your book,
Mhm.
obviously, and I'm also interested in the practical applications of them. When you have people that show up at MJE, what percentage of them like really have no idea about, as we say, that they don't know the Aleph Bays, or how many of them are, say, people that went to Ramaz and are not interested in it and
Mhm.
are trying to find an introductory path back?
That's a great question. I would say 85-15. Let
Got
me
it.
give you
Okay.
that. 85% people who did not go to day school, but just because you didn't go to Jewish day school doesn't mean you don't know anything. You did go to Hebrew school, although it's a big turnoff for most of my students over the years. If I took a poll, I put 100 Jews in the room and I asked them about their Hebrew school temple experience growing up, 90% negative.
Well, I'm actually curious on that. Like, what are the top three turnoffs for if you have if you'd ask
Oh
people like why
gosh,
the
school after school. It was presented as gotta
right
go to school after you get home from school. So try to sell that to your son or daughter. Forget it. Number two, bad teachers. Now they won't say this, but I know this because they don't want to say not nice things about other people. We have very fine people coming to MGE. But if you look at who a lot of the temples and synagogues hired, just people trying to make a buck. And because they knew a little something about Judaism, a lot of them were very conflicted about their own Judaism or just like negative or didn't care.
or
And
they're Israelis and they speak Hebrew. So
yeah, a lot of that too. Excellent. Um, and there's just like there was, I mean, part of it is not the school's fault, which is just an age thing, because Judaism has a lot of profound, intellectual ideas, compelling thoughts. What 9, 10-year-old is interested in that? So by the time you got them to the age where they're starting to think a little and use their brains, like high school, they're out the door. They don't want to continue anymore. They're basically graduated from their Judaism at their bar bat mitzvah. And so we actually tried our hand for a couple of years. I just ran out of funding for this, but I started a Hebrew school at MGE. It's called MGE for Youth. Make your child's bar/bat mitzvah the beginning, not the end. And I had a really beautiful group of kids. And we try to make it fun. And by the way, just thinking, I brought Chabad in to do a shofar crafting thing before Rosh Hashanah. I brought them to a matzah baking factory. I showed, just to deal with their age, you know what I mean? And show them the positivity and the excitement and and so that they don't, the goal there is just so they want to stay with it. So when their brains are formed enough or developed enough to actually conceptualize basic Torah ideas, they're not out the door. So I just think that's the Hebrew school is just like,
you described my issues with Jewish education as a kid almost to a T. So
that was your
uh,
background.
I mean, listen, thank God I have a beautiful family, modern Orthodox family. I went to I started I'm not going to throw particular schools under the
Mm,
bus, but those who
right.
know me know what schools I'm talking about. And I went to school and I had just horrendous oversight from the teachers who are supposed to be in charge of the classroom. It was not particularly well organized and run. And then when my parents made a very difficult choice to pull me out of a Jewish day school, I then went first to a public school and then had tutors after.
Hmm.
Very nice and fine people, but it's very hard to keep your attention on that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then by the time you get to a certain age, you might be thinking of ideas. You're already consumed with other
correct. Yeah,
stuff. And what
yeah.
actually saved me from a less ideal path was actually birthright. So,
Really?
um,
Oh,
yeah,
that's
but
amazing.
that's yeah, but again, that's like a nace. That's you shouldn't be relying on these Hail Mary,
My
wrong
my
term, but
my wife
yeah,
is from Great Neck. Okay, there are more Jews in Great Neck relative to non-Jews than probably any other suburb. It wasn't until she graduated University of Wisconsin, moved to New York City, that she started looking into Judaism a little because some rabbi got before her. And that's big inspiration behind what she does. Rabbi Buchwald, to give him a shout out
wow.
at Lincoln Square. And yeah, she went to his beginner service, and he's been my mentor and teacher. And by the way, the most supportive and least territorial of any outreach rabbi or rabbi that I know, just just encouraging and helpful throughout the years. I went to him for blessings and everything, and I have a lot of karat to But you asked the question, how many people come in? We got a decent number. And I see in Tel Aviv, there are a lot of modern Orthodox singles that make Aliyah or trying to make Aliyah, move to Tel Aviv. And we just did a dinner 2 Friday nights ago in Tel Aviv and had about 70, 80 people. A good 20 of them were day school graduates. And they really they need the inspiration. They need the connection. And I used to think we got to keep them separated because the FFBs, if you will, from birth are going to be rolling their eyes when I'm benching out loud, and the beginners are going to get turned off by some of and there's some of that's true. Like if you're teaching a class, you maybe want to separate them a little because they're different backgrounds, but everybody needs inspiration, and it's very inspiring. And I attribute my kids staying on the straight and narrow to this. And I tell everyone in the modern Orthodox world, you should have a beginner at your Shabbat table every week. If you want to inspire your children, don't do it for the beginner to Judaism, do it for your family. Because if you want to inspire your kids who are a little jaded because they've been there and done that, and they meet someone who's kind of a cool person otherwise, who could be doing anything right now, but is choosing to observe Shabbat to whatever degree, that's a game changer in the mindset of like a 15, 16-year-old.
I also think it forces education, right? Because there's times where you can get away with things or it can just be part of your routine. But if you're actually sitting there being asked to think about it, just 2 Shabbosim ago, my 5-year-old was helping someone learn how to wash on the Netilas Yadayim. Right, for him, it's like the coolest thing in the whole world. Here, I'm telling us, an old guy how to wash, right? But to
Right.
see that this is something you've learned, you're able to apply it. It gives them this confidence, and then also to think about it. If someone says, "Why are we doing this?" then they're thinking about, okay, what's going on with Shabbos.
Yeah,
I think it's a
yeah.
beautiful thing.
Oh my God, it totally forces you because if you stopped the typical day school graduate on the street and you said, "Tell me why you believe in God. Tell me why you believe the Torah is from a higher place, or give me some Jewish," that's one of the reasons I wrote this too, for day school graduates, so that they can learn to articulate and just have the basics because we never learned this stuff. None of what I've taught in the last 30 years did I ever learn in day school or rabbinical school. And you have to kind of learn it on the job. And like as you said it so well, like it forces you. We need to be forced to articulate our beliefs because if we don't really know what they are.
Right, and I think also just being vulnerable about something. I think it's very hard, especially when people see that someone appears in a certain way, they assume that all these people are uh, either very devout, very knowledgeable. There's a little bit of an intimidation. I'll never forget the first time I went to Tom's River for Shabbos. And, you see there's strimals and this and that. You're expecting everyone is going to be the most pious, uh, on top of everything. Oh, am I going to be the only person who doesn't hold by a daily Gemara shiur? And then you see that you have a bunch of very normal people.
Right. They're
And
living,
I
they're
think
people.
they're
Right.
living like normal people. And
Right.
again, you have wide range, different interests, and I think that that's something that is oftentimes hard to articulate and to show to people who are just re-entering or reimagining life with Judaism being a very very central force.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about Tikkun Olam.
Hmm.
Uh, when I see that, certainly most viewers of my podcast, we cringe, we vomit, we say this is like some Obama crazy stuff
Hmm.
or some sort of reconstructionist Judaism. What is Tikkun Olam to you?
So that's why I wrote the chapter because we should stop vomiting every when we see that term. And by the way, I have the same gut reaction because it's been turned on its head. And it's amazing when an authentically Jewish concept is turned around and used against you. There's nothing more, just, I don't want to use the word evil, but it's bad. Tikkun Olam is, although it's not listed by the Rambam, Maimonides, or others in the 613, it's a meta principle in Judaism. There are 3 psukim, verses from Sefer Yeshayahu, the book of Isaiah alone, that tell us that we're supposed to be an Or LaGoyim, a light amongst the nations. We're supposed to bring light into the world. We're supposed to heal. It's all over. I've got 50 sources in there, but it's Letaken Olam B'Malchut Shakai. And that last part of the verse has been truncated. It's to fix the world within the kingdom of Hashem, which means that what you are using to fix the world and the way you fix the world has to be consistent with Judaism. You can't just make up something that you think is Jewish because it happens to be a progressive liberal, stance on something and call it tikkun olam. And that's effectively what's happened. And I'll tell you, when you do that and you don't learn how to balance tikkun olam with other Jewish values, and that's your whole religion, you're going to end up having a fakakta Judaism. And that's where we are. They're the best example. I put this in the book from Lot, Abraham's nephew. What happens? He learns this great value of called Hachnasat Orchim, hospitality. Learns it from his uncle Avram. Abram and Sarah open up their tent. He's in Sodom, where Hachnasat Orchim, hospitality, is like illegal. They come banging on his doors. The Sodomites come banging on his doors. We hear you're harboring a guest. What does Lot say? Take my daughters. Take my virgin daughters and do as you please, but don't touch my guests. Now that's an example of blowing up Tikkun Olam around one thing and completely ignoring other Jewish values like sexual modesty and purity and being a decent parent, you know? So it's and literally, I'm sure you right now, Daniel, can come up with 10 examples of modern examples of that, and that's why.
It often gets me in trouble. Yeah.
But we have to continue to talk about it, because then what we do is we have basically relegated the concept of tikkun olam to the far left, and it's their mitzvah now. It's theirs. It's not really part of Judaism, and that's really falsifying Judaism,
I,
because Judaism believes in tikkun olam, but we believe in doing it in the right way.
I'm not trying to drag you into international controversy, but I took a very public stand several months ago before Mamdani
Hmm.
was eventually elected, and there was a very prominent rabbi in that congregation. It's a Reform congregation, but in that congregation there is there's a video of them on Rosh Hashanah, a congregant citing the New Testament in support of trans ideology.
Right.
And then when I point out that this is very strange, that there's a number of inconsistencies between the allowance of this and this being clearly non-Jewish ideas, it's the New Testament, and it also wasn't even cited correctly, right? It has nothing to do with trans ideology, but to you can support that in your congregation, but then when you have an actual anti-Semite running for mayor, you at that point had not yet to say anything, and
Hmm.
then people are saying, "Oh my God, we have to be united. How can you say this? How do you navigate that as a rabbi when you're talking about
I,
these kind of fakakta ideas?"
so I remember that, and I remember you talking about it. I follow you. I listen to your great podcast. I will tell you, we need to remember that Reform Judaism set out to reform Judaism. They don't claim to be holding on to any classic definitions of what Judaism has always meant for thousands of years. When the early reformers developed this new branch of Judaism called Reform Judaism, they set out straight out that it's going to be different. It's going to be so. I don't know why we feel the need to somehow, you know, reconcile what the reform movement is saying, to make it consistent with classical Judaism. It was never
And
meant.
the conservative movement was a response to reform. It was not a
Correct.
response to orthodox. It was a
No, it was to
response to
conserve. It was to conserve
yeah. It
Judaism
was
from
I
that
think it was like
reformation.
I think it was Tray Food at some sort of at a summit
Now
in
that was reform. That was the Pittsburgh platform,
right. But I
and
think because conservative had a response to that, right? I think it was something in that.
yeah, yeah, that's what
Okay,
set them off.
that's what set them
That
off
was
because
the
they said, "I'm
impetus.
not going to
Yeah,
have this like
correct.
whatever shrimp cocktails or
Right, and that's why the conservative movement was trying to conserve Judaism. They were trying to create a Judaism that would be successful in America. They didn't think Orthodoxy could be successful. It wasn't called Orthodoxy. It was just Judaism. That's all there was before conservative reform. Yeah, we had other sects, the Sadducees and and all that years earlier, but it's basically either you were an observant Jew or you're not observant Jew. You were either Sabbath observant, you weren't Sabbath observant. Reform Judaism came along and said, we are going to change it. And if you celebrate, let's say, a trans person as a normative, alternative, a lifestyle, that's not because it's a Jewish thing. You can call it Judaism all you want, but you can say, I'm reforming Judaism to include things like trans, to include things like supporting a Mandami who everybody, and anyone, excuse me, normal understands that he's an anti-Semite. And therefore, pumping him up in any way is like, we're our own worst enemy. But we just have to remember what Reform Judaism is, and when it starts getting presented as a legit alternative way of looking at Torah, then you got big problems.
So how do we navigate this? Because obviously you and I are having a wonderful conversation. I've had tons of conversations with all sorts of people with whom I disagree. I've had a number of writers from Haaretz on my podcast. I've had Hamas supporters on my podcast. I've had Peter Beinart on my podcast. Yet when it gets to that weird middle ground of people that are trying to kind of play to the
Mhm.
center or play that they're normal, and then they really can't defend some of these principles because they'll be frankly exposed. They run away and they won't talk about it. So how do you suggest the Jewish community have those kinds of difficult conversations? And I also understand, I just want to put a caveat. It's
Mhm.
different when you have a podcast host or someone like myself who's writing on Substack versus someone who's leading a congregation or is leading, MJ is a congregation, but an organization, something like that. I understand there has to be some sort of sensitivity. You don't want to drive people away, but
Right.
like I came on my podcast. I said that the ideas put forward by these leaders in the reform movement is more dangerous than Zoran Mamdani because you have a generation of people that, God forbid, they go into these congregations and they hear these kinds of crazy ideas, and you are
Right.
actually setting them off on a path that is antithetical to Judaism. Zoran Mamdani, at max, would be mayor for 8 years. So how do you
Right. This is a
suggest or
bigger.
think about these kinds of
So
conversations?
I want to start on a positive because there are certain positive things about conservative Reform Judaism that I think Orthodox rabbis should acknowledge. I know that most of my students and participants who come to MG are coming from Reform conservative backgrounds, and it's less what's the word? It's just much less common for someone who's completely unaffiliated in their youth, didn't go to any temple on Yom Kippur. I have some like that, but it's much less common to find such a person finding their way into through the doors of MGE and finding their Yiddishkeit in life. So we owe, in a sense, a debt of gratitude to conservative Reform Judaism for holding on to a lot of Jews, and that's a reality now. And I can say that even though they might be holding on to that segment of Judaism of Jewry, young Jews or whatever age, at the expense of what I believe to be theologically correct or not, and what I understand to be authentic Judaism. Those are two separate things. And I've been on conferences with Reform and conservative rabbis, and I have colleagues and friends, and I applaud them because they are trying in their minds to do what is right for the Jewish people. And they are devoting their lives to trying to keep people Jewish. Now, from your perspective and my perspective, they're replacing classical Judaism with liberal progressive values, and that's not Judaism. But I can say both of those things at the same time. That I thank you for trying, and I thank you for keeping many Jews in the fold, but the ideology that you're espousing and this concept that you are trying to put within the rubric of Torah, I'm sorry, does not belong anywhere. And I think we have to do that because we need to maintain achdus. We can't alienate achdus, unity and love and respect between different Jews. We can't alienate so many of our Jewish brothers and sisters and other rabbinic teachers and leaders in the community, even if I vehemently, which I do, disagree with a lot of their stances and their views on things. They are, I don't think that they are trying to do something
Well,
wrong.
I'll just say this.
Yeah.
I've never challenged intentions. I would never challenge intentions when it comes to these kinds of things. I think if someone doesn't know, then they genuinely don't know. And if they think that that's a legitimate path, I'm going to take them at face value that that's what they think is a legitimate path. That's something where, for me, and actually I got into this, I'll say his name. I mean, I'll say Jonah Platt.
Hmm.
I then actually had a very productive conversation with him privately, and God willing, he'll come on my podcast or go on his, whatever it might be. But I was not anti-women, anti-Asian, nothing to do with that. It has literally nothing to do with anyone's personal ways that people would be identified or anything like that. My main concern though is just that how do we? It's kind of like if we applied it anywhere else, would we be uh, like take for example Notori Karta, the
Right. Right.
alleged Haredi people that
Right.
are supporting Iran and hate Israel, or you take Jewish Voice for Peace, something like that, right? We very clearly come out and say these are my word, whack jobs, and they do not represent Judaism in any way. This is completely crazy.
Yeah.
But when it comes to some of the theological tenets of Judaism,
Right.
uh, it's much more complicated to
It's
actually
much.
come out and take that
Yeah, and I
stand.
wouldn't because they're not doing anything, in my opinion, to endanger Jews. Meaning, Neturei Karta and people completely on the other side are siding with our enemies. They're sitting there. I remember when they sat down with Ahmadinejad from Iran, and they
Right.
gave legitimacy to him. And like that is really aiding and abetting the enemy. That's my line. There are very few conservative reform rabbis that I know or I've read their material, and it upsets me and it bothers me things being said in the name of Judaism that I think are really not. But they're trying to advance Judaism insofar as they understand it, and
Well, wait a
that's
second. I will say there are some that go and do the rabbis for human rights, like crazy protests, or are trying to raise money for different causes in Gaza. Again, they might be the more extreme
right,
groups, but what
right,
I guess my point is
yeah,
just it's a,
yeah, I hear
obviously
you,
we're having a good back and forth. It's a good
right.
struggle over it. I just haven't really seen that struggle happen. Like I'm sitting here watching these clips, watching what's going on, and I want to pull my hair out
But you
because
got
I'm
to remember also,
yeah,
like Emil Hirsch, he's a rabbi here on the
yes,
Upper
he's
West
great.
Side. He's amazing. Elliot Cosgrove was a very prominent conservative rabbi. I consider him a, you know, well, not close, but a friend, a colleague. And these are people that we can talk to. Okay, these are people who are, in my opinion, not poisoning the minds of their congregants with falsehoods. They're teaching Torah as they understand it. I may disagree with many different points, um, but I think that in the
I'll just I'll
spirit,
just I'll just add that Rabbi Cosgrove brought Timothy Dolan while wearing a big cross onto his bima on Yom Kippur to Duchen to do the priestly blessing. It's on video. I find that to be highly problematic. I'm sure you do too. I'm not going to ask you to say that, but as much as again, I respect him, but I'm just saying,
right,
like, I'm like sitting here, like, okay, wow, like,
right, right.
ah,
But I hear you, and I find it problematic too. But I think the Jewish people, I think we need to find, as Rav Nachman famously taught, the Nakuda Tova, the good in each other. And we have to recognize that if we get too high up on our ideals all the time at the expense of our students, because so many of our participants, the last thing, I remember, kids love when their parents get along. They love it. It's a very, very important thing. The studies all show that it like makes a kid feel secure when they see their mother and their father lovey-dovey with each other sometimes. And it's really painful for children to be in the presence of parents who are fighting. And I don't think it's any different with our students and our participants. And they don't make those kind of chilukim and distinctions between conservative reform. And I know they're smart and they can make those nuanced chilukim, but the bottom line is you're all rabbis and you're all a bunch of leaders, and they want to see us getting along. And to the degree that we can get along, and I'm sure you agree with this, like that's one of the things we
100%.
do have control over. And October 7th was preceded by a lot of division, and we have to, and it's going to turn back into that. We have to figure out ways in the diaspora and in Israel. I mean, this is not as much of a problem in Israel because you don't really have such well-developed reform conservative denominations in Israel, but you've got the whole in the army thing, and we've got to figure out a way. We're tiny people. We need to stay in love with each other, while we completely disagree with each other. You know, um,
Bef-
I mean,
before
I'll tell
actually,
you what.
before, but
Yeah,
yeah,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
go ahead. No,
I was gonna say
Shai David.
before we
Yeah.
wrap, I just wanted to. Well, you're going to go to Shai Davidai, but how do you reconcile for the people who show up at MJE and they're saying, okay, I'm all excited
Mhm.
and I want to get involved and I love Israel, and then they open up Haaretz and it says, Netanyahu, the dictator, is is
Right,
is performing human sacrifice of our children. And then you go to some
right.
of the Haredi papers and they say, I don't want to be like those idol worshippers and go to the army. Like, how do you deal with that
Yeah,
insane spectrum
it is so
of
hard.
Jews speaking like that?
Jews, I know it's very hard, but I think you got to pull the lens back and pull the focus off Netanyahu, off the specific government, and then focus your students and your congregants on love and support for Israel, period. And I'm not going to get pulled into the political thing. The challenge, Daniel, comes when it harps on a real moral Torah issue. And I'm sure we can come up with many examples of when a leader does something that really goes against the Torah, and does something like shouldn't you if you don't call it out, then you're kind of letting it go and you're giving your congregants, your students the impression that you're okay with it now, and that gets complicated. But It's very hard. I have a son in the army, and and I love parts of the Haredi world, and a lot of my rebbeim are in the Haredi world. Um, and they're learning in the same yeshivas where they're fighting the draft. And when my son went to enlist, there were three yeshivish guys who tried convincing, very respectful and my son sat with them and like, it's Milchemes Mitzvah. I came from New York. I need to be there and fight and like, and it's upsetting. And if you just keep going with that, you're just going to get angry, and you're going to get your congregants angry, and you're going to feel all self-righteous. And guess what you just did? You just created a rift, and you just like, shined a spotlight on our big rifts and problems. We already know what the problems and the rifts are. We just need love. And how are we going to solve the problem? I don't know, but it's not going to be by calling each other out on it. Not here in the diaspora, not in Israel. I don't have an easy solution. I really don't, because
Well, I
um,
think I'll offer my solution. My solution is not when you call things out, it not being personal, in the sense
mhm,
that if you
mhm.
call out these ideas, we can have an agreement that you're making a good faith attempt to not be overtly crazy. I'll put it that way. And you're actually concerned about the issues.
Right.
And I think if once you're concerned with it and you can agree with it, like
Yeah.
I could sit down with Rabbi Cosgrove tomorrow. I've invited him on my podcast a number of times. I could sit down with him tomorrow and have a very, very serious, loving, thoughtful conversation that is not in 0% personal. It does not faze me. It does not bother me. Just like when I lived on the Upper West Side and I'd pass Peter Beinart on the way to Shul, every single Shabbos, I say, "Good Shabbos, Peter." Shake his hand, talk about whatever it is talking about. I even said to his face, "I disagree with everything you say. If you told me that today is Shabbos, I'm not sure I'd believe you, but good Shabbos." Okay? But it's not
Right.
personal.
No, no, no.
And
I think that's a
I think
great
that's the
answer.
first step.
No,
Just
that's a
like,
great answer, and you see in all the a couple exceptions in Shas and the Gemara where people are arguing vehemently. Um, they're not personalizing. They're attacks. They're attacking the argument of their opponent. They're not, that's why it said, famous teaching, why does it say Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel? Because Shammai and Hillel got along and their daughters married their sons and vice versa. But their academies represented different, viewpoints. Now, they were all within what we would consider the Torah perspective on things,
right.
which is hard when you're dealing with a rabbi that's really outside of that and doesn't accept a lot of the basic tenets of classical Judaism. That's harder. But I think you can apply the same principle. Just don't make it personal. And we got to be able to sit and talk about these issues. And then when your students ask you, what's your point of view, you tell them what your point of view and they'll figure out, but you shake the other guy's hand. And by the way, I'll just say this. When I grew up, I'm older than you. This was like a no-brainer in politics. I worked for
Right. Of
Senator
course.
Daniel Patrick Moynihan of blessed memory. He was a great man. He was a liberal progressive Democrat. Now, he was also the one who defeated Zionism as racism bill in the United Nations. But I used to see him going out to lunch with prominent Republican figures, and it wasn't for a photo op. They were actually friends. And you don't see that today. Everybody's in their little camp, and that's so unhealthy. And it's unhealthy because that means we're going to stay in our little bubble, and we're not going to really our thoughts and our positions are not going to be challenged, and they're not going to be refined as a result because we're just agreeing with each other because we're not talking. So I hope you get Rabbi Cosgrove on your, and I hope you get even not Emil Hirsch. She's not so difficult. You got to take somebody really out
No,
there.
no. Again, I would. I, it was crazy. I had one episode with Asher Gedalia. He's the brother of Yosef Gedalia, Hashem Yikam Damo,
Yeah,
who was
yeah,
murdered on October 7th in
yeah.
Kfar Aza, trying to rescue civilians. And I had a man, Ori Goldberg, who I think he has a doctorate, and he is a frequent guest on Al Jazeera. And we were having discussions the most peaceful, respectful way about this is what you see, this is what you see. Okay, here we are. It was amazing. It was a great conversation.
Yeah.
That's what I think advances. So at least you can come to the conclusion that this is where this person's coming from. This is where they stand. This is where the other person's coming from. That's where they stand. And you can evaluate what you think of it. For those who have made it this far, I really appreciate it. Please check out The Jewish Experience, published by Rabbi Wilds, available wherever I'm guessing wherever books are sold, but it's
Yeah, you
published by
get it on
Koren,
Amazon. You can come to MG, get
Amazon.
a copy, or all the Jewish bookstores, Westside
And
Judaica.
if you're in the Upper West Side, I highly recommend stopping by MJ or in Tel Aviv and check them out online. MJ, Rabbi Wilds, thank you so much. Really appreciate
Daniel,
your
it was
time.
such an honor and a pleasure. I really appreciate being invited. Thanks.
Thank you.